like they might need exposure by a lifting partner or somebody, like maybe it's a coach or whoever that like, no, you actually can push way harder than that, so like people's relative exertion, they think like, oh yeah, I would rate that workout a 10 out of 10. You have no idea, homie.
Welcome to Iron Summit, where we cover topics about health, fitness, and general performance through the eyes of former elite Division I wrestlers.
So I just want to start out with a quick fitness tip. And I think if you have a mustache, it's a guaranteed 20% increase on your bench. So that's
15 to 20.
That one's for free, just whatever. Take that for what it's worth.
That's why Ryan is, he's keeping the mustache from now on.
It's postseason mustache, baby.
Ryan is committed to us.
That's a real thing.
Whoa,
I'm going to hold you to it.
Hey, I didn't say it. Max said it. Listen, okay.
No.
On a serious note,
got it.
On a serious note, though, I do need to talk about something that I've been waiting to talk about. And so this is perfect, Pat. I need you here for this. I need your support here.
Let's do it.
Just got to talk about the elephant in the room with Max and basically just the fact that we wear the same size swimsuit. So basically Max and I are the same size.
This is transitive property. I mean, your bench is probably the same as his.
It's so Max can't even deny it. Max, did we wear the same swimsuit?
Well, let's rewind for a second.
Well. Hang on.
There's a perfectly logical explanation to this.
Okay.
I went to Ryan's house to hot tub. Just two guys in a hot tub,
Nothing crazy.
Nothing crazy. And I didn't have swim trunks. So I asked, can I borrow a pair? He's like, yeah, I got you covered. And I put on a pair. They were absolutely pasted to my legs. Looked like they could have been painted on. Yeah, they were painted on. But Ryan really enjoyed that for some reason and has just not let it go.
I just would like to recap what Max said was that he wore my swimsuit and it fit him. That is all I heard from that.
And what was Ryan wearing at the time? Give you the shirt off. I'll give you the shirt off my back in a different sense.
Oh man, Ryan. I'll give it to Ryan. I fit in his swim trunks. I don't know why Ryan has such a big pair of swim trunks. Like, it's kind of embarrassing. Probably.
Hey, I love that you're trying to flip this, but we got the same size legs and butt. That's all I got to say. So, whatever. All right.
You got a swim shirt too, Ryan?
Hey, when I was little though, in Mexico, I'd get
no way. You were one of those kids?
Well, we went to Mexico, right? And my brother and I would just you couldn't contain us. We wouldn't wear sunscreen. So my mom was smart and put a swim shirt on us. So after, a day or two, we're not just crying about how red our skin is and getting skin cancer. So there was a good year or two where I was a swim shirt kid, but mostly just because I didn't listen to my mom. I was pasty white and wouldn't wear sunscreen.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Honestly,
we've all been forced to wear them, or at least I have.
Really? Oh,
not a fan.
I was just burning out there.
That's why you're gonna get cancer.
Yeah, I mean, you know how I feel about that. We're all getting cancer.
That's awesome. All right, Pat. Well, Pondering Pat. I think one really good question to start here is, what percent do you guys think is genetics versus work? Like, how much can you actually increase lifts? Everyone's got genetic potential and then, hard work. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but, I think there's a lot of genetic components, but how much do you think you could actually increase a lift, or how much in a sport can you actually work up to versus just your natural genetic talent?
I have an answer for this, but I want to hear Pat's first.
Okay. I was going to say the same thing. So my take on it, and for anybody that doesn't know me, everybody thinks I'm a pessimist, but I consider myself a realist, whatever. But probably one of the most optimistic things I have in my brain is that I do believe people can always train and get in better shape, and you can always beat genetics to a certain point, in my opinion. Like, I think so much diet and lifestyle and consistency in that is going to kind of write your own path and change how you look. You're never going to change. You can't train to be 6'3". You can't train to run a 969 100-meter dash. Those are genetics. Like, once you're talking shaving the 0.5% from the 1%, that, in my opinion, I think genetics gets you to like the very peak performance of whatever you do. But I also think, like, for the masses, there's people with bad genetics, like, yeah, you got a slow metabolism, or your parents are overweight and you kind of, you build into that. But I also think there's a huge cultural aspect too. Like, you grew up, eating like shit. You grew up kind of not having a good lifestyle. I think you can always, like, you could still build muscle. You could still lower your body fat by doing lifestyle things like training, eating, being consistent with recovery, sleep, all the, good things that you guys talk to extent about. But as far as like the 1%, I do think genetics is like, gets you to the peak of the peak of the peak. But I don't know. Fundamentally, I believe that like people can always change and improve regardless of their genetics.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. Maybe I'd caveat it one step further. I think it's saying the same thing you're saying, though, is genetics. I think the higher skill and activity, the less genetics matter. So, like wrestling, baseball, sports where skill is one of the primary drivers of success, you can kind of eliminate some of the importance of genetics. Because really, when we're saying genetics, we're meaning physical genetics, like physical limitations. Because there's
Exactly.
also mental genetics, right? Which, some people are maybe born to work harder. But physical genetics, I think the higher skill sport or activity, the less genetics matter. If you're talking like you said, Pat, like 100-meter dash or basketball, like there's just a immutable physical trait of being tall. That's like a prerequisite to being good. Then genetics matters a whole lot.
A
If we're
ton.
talking, we're meatheads, Ryan and I are wearing tank tops. If you're listening, my tank top's a lot bigger than Ryan's.
They're the same size, everything.
But if we're talking meatheads, so just like physique and strength, genetics is probably more than people want to know it is. Now, that being said, one second, I'll get to percent. It's probably not going to be accurate, but that being said, the genetics is like the blueprints, right? You still got to go build the house.
Exactly. I totally
And
agree
you
with
can maximize your genetics, right? Like everyone has the ability to do that. And most of the time that's like a pretty good physique and being pretty strong. Now, like, yeah, how strong and how good you are, that's within those blueprints. I'd say, let's put everyone on the same playing field. Everyone's working their ass off. It's like, then it's, 100% genetics. If it's just hard workers, because it is easier for some people. I don't know. For physique, Ryan, you want to narrow it down to physique potential?
Maybe, but I think physique's kind of subjective. Like, I'm thinking, if you can bench 200 pounds and you don't work out, what's the max you could add to your bench?
I see what you're saying. How
You know,
much
because
more?
because there's some people that are just naturally stronger. But let's say everybody's baseline's different. What percent of your baseline could you go up before you hit like this wall where it's like you can't really add any muscle tissue, or like strength to a certain degree, which obviously you could argue maybe you could do little things, but you know what I'm saying? Like, from your starting point, what's the max out you can get past that?
Oh, you can, I think like genetics can make like a 400% difference there. Like, you just can have someone who can bench, they're not going to do anything, or maybe 400 is probably a lot. 250, 300%. You can have someone who can bench 3 times someone else just because they're made to do it better, even if both people are working hard.
So I'm interpreting that as like a split between what percentage is what I would say it's like a 60-40. Like 60% of your, you know,
Strength.
strength and performance and everything comes from your genetic code. And then, by the way, that totally, I'm neglecting the outliers of like people that are born with genetic mutation, or like they literally don't have the gene for,
Right.
creating this type of protein, whatever. There are genetic outliers that, and yeah, that's a binary. If you don't have it, you don't have it. But for the masses and the normal people, I think it's like, in my opinion, I think genetics should be, this is wildly, I have no,
It's just out there.
yes, no scientific evidence to back up these numbers whatsoever. I think it's like a 60-40. Like
I think that's a fair number.
you can get 60, and some people think it's like genetics are 90%, and I just fundamentally don't. I think you can improve more than 10% in your life. I think you can do more than that with what you have.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think 60-40. But then if you go to like wrestling, I think it's 10% genetics, 90% work.
Because it's technical, and that's your learning ability. That's your attitude, your discipline, toughness.
Yeah.
Dude. You can't teach that. You're not
but
born with that.
you don't. But I think there's a certain genetic component to that as well. Like your mindset, your toughness, whatever you want to call it. Like your ability to work, your ability to like continue to show up when it sucks. Like I think I used to think, and I still think, obviously, hard work is super important. I will never disagree with that. But I do think I used to think that there was a lot less of a genetic component. And just thinking about it more and more, I think there's some like pretty major genetic components. But then I got like, there's like some outliers of like a football player that's in the NFL that's 5'8". And it's like, how'd this dude that's tiny compared to these, 6'5", 350-pound linemen that can run faster than 90% of humans, how does a guy compete with that? And they do very well. But it's like for the mass majority of people, I think, and the other thing is, do people self-select? Because if you're good at a sport, you probably stay in the sport longer. So genetically, if you're like dispositioned to be good at this sport, most people find that out or they stop playing the sport. It seems to me. And then it becomes like a hard work, a skill gap, like, and there's other things that you add on top of it. But I think there's a high genetic component as well, obviously at the highest level. In high school, maybe it's less. I don't know. In middle school, maybe it's less. But I'm never going to be an Olympic sprinter. Like I'm just not genetically there. Like I'm not going to run a crazy fast 100-meter dash.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. And then we've talked about it a little bit too. And this is to your point, Ryan, there's epigenetics, which is how, based on what you're doing at a young age, how much of your genetic code you're expressing. So if you're doing combat sports from a young age, I think you have a better predisposition to be strong. If you're playing violin the whole time, you're going to have a genetic predisposition to be better at that. I was also trying to find, I sent Ryan, we do like this topic. I sent him it was an Instagram post I saw from an elite powerlifter who's basically just saying like, just because you have quote unquote good genetics doesn't mean it makes it easy. You're just like, and most people, like Ryan said, do self-select. So you're just kind of figuring out if you're doing active, especially let's use context of sports or strength training, you're doing that stuff from a young age. You're probably going to figure out through self-selection what you're good at. And like Ryan said, you're born to be a sprinter, you're going to be a sprinter. You're born to be a wrestler, you're going to figure out, wrestling's what's for you. So a lot of, at the high level of different activities, you have self-selective genetics. So you're kind of seeing who's meant to be there.
But you still have to do the work. I just can't stand when people are like, and I'm going to hell for saying this probably, but like you get overweight people or you get, people that are clearly living a lazy mentality or lazy lifestyle. And they're like, oh, I just have bad genetics. It's like, no, you're a lazy ass. You know what I mean? Even though you have bad genetics, you can still do something. Even if you have great genetics, you can still squander them. You still have to work to refine that. And I think that goes off of like your epigenetics point. Like you still have to express those genes and those traits on a daily basis. Like Ryan said, rents due every day for certain things. And I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that too, Pat. I think people use genetics as an excuse a lot. And
Yeah.
like you might not you might not hit the same level as somebody else that maybe has a better genetic background, or you might hit a better level than somebody else that has a different genetic background. But everybody can improve, and I think that's like something that needs to be taken into account too. Like there is something you can do about this. There's definitely not 100% genetic component, but I think also too, kind of like what you were saying, Pat, earlier, it's interesting to me too, how you grow up and what you're around when you're growing up. Cause I read a study a couple months ago. It's pretty interesting. That was talking about how like they were following around like pregnant mothers and the mothers that were like working out and in shape and, um, and the fathers as well, like months before the pregnancy and then during the pregnancy, those kids came out with like better genetic conditions or whatever. So it's like, what percentage of that can we control? And what percentage of that is like, well, it's the cards you were dealt and you're just gonna have to play that hand.
Yeah. How about this? I think to your point, Pat, how about this? Good genetics allows you to work harder, but it still takes the work. Like
Yeah,
having
I
a
would.
really good set of genetics is like honestly no different than taking PEDs. You can just do more.
Mm,
You can do more work. You can do more. You know, there's some people who have to take PEDs to achieve what Ryan does natural. Some
yeah,
people can take PEDs and never achieve what Ryan does natural.
for sure.
Not complimenting Ryan because I wouldn't do that, but
Hey,
that's what genetics are.
same size swimsuit, man.
I
All right.
100% agree with that. And at the same token, like you can take PEDs and like let's say somebody goes on anabolic steroids. If you still don't like lift and eat properly,
Nothing's happening.
nothing's happening, you know? So like you still have to do the behavioral component in order to see the benefits. It's basically what you're trying to do when you take PEDs or anabolic steroids is you're trying to enhance your body's genetic quote unquote
Exactly.
capabilities, right? So that argument kind of proves the point there, at least in my eyes. Like you still have to do it, which is a
Still
behavioral
gotta do
trait,
it.
which in my opinion is, you know, I think that there's a lot of behavioral components to the genetic like argument. It's only going to get you so far to the point where, okay, yeah, now the work and hard work is going to have to take over and have a huge impact on performance.
I think too, Pat, like just going off of that, what I love about that too is like, even if genetics was 99% of it, there's nothing you can do about that. You better focus on the 1% that you can do something about. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
putting in the work and figuring it out. So
Control what you
maybe
can
this,
control.
Control what
yeah,
you can
yeah.
control. God, I was just thinking it.
Stole it. I think let's end that discussion on that because I think that's probably the best place to end that. What else we got on Pondering, Pat?
Uh-oh.
So I got a little hot topic here. And Ryan and I have kind of talked this a little bit in the office, just kind of shooting shit. But Max, I asked you a couple of days ago where you think our body fat percentages are at. And I'm kind of curious on that. Like, I don't know if it's a judgmental thing or just like a, you know, curiosity thing, but like, I'm always curious about like, you can tell a lot about a person based on not just their body fat percentage, but like their walk, you know, their physique, their build. Like you can kind of see somebody's history. Look at wrestlers. Like you can point a wrestler out in a you know in a crowded room. You know, there's one guy in the room that walks different. He's got bow legs. He's got shriveled shoulders. It's like, yep, that's the wrestler. You know. So my hot take is like you can kind of infer a lot about somebody's character, their lifestyle, their uh, maybe not like morals or values and stuff, but I think you can tell a lot about a person based on their body fat percentage or their um
The physical appearance.
yeah, their physical appearance. So curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is that a shallow type of thing to look at? Is that just pure judgment or is it something that you think there's merit in?
Um, that's a good one. Good hot topic. Let's put it this way.
And it's
I
more
don't know.
prevalent in the fitness industry and
Yeah.
athletic industry than probably people care to admit.
I don't know if you can tell someone isn't a good person by their physical appearance, but if you see someone who clearly takes care of themselves, clearly trains, has good muscle mass, it does tell you certain things, right? It tells you that that person has some level of discipline, cares for themselves on some level, has an ability to do something hard, especially in today's world. We just talked about this with Joe DeSena on our last episode, which was
Yep.
like, we live in such a good time in the best country to ever exist, the United States of America, that like pretty much the only thing left hard to do is physical things. Yeah. So I do think that it can tell you something. That being said, that person also might have the, zero morals and ethics and just be a terrible person. But I think there are
Yeah,
certain
totally.
things you can tell if someone's in good shape. And I'll tell you what, I'm much more inclined, and maybe this is shallow and judgmental of me, but if someone's in good shape, I just want to like that person.
100%.
But that's natural too, though, because that's like common ground, Max. Like you can talk that, like people like talking to people that they have stuff in common with, and you can talk shop with somebody that's like in shape because obviously they got it. You don't just get that. You can't buy that. There's like crazy stats. Like there's less people that have six packs than like $1 million in America. Like it's just like you
That's
can't just
crazy.
have a physique. You can't buy a physique really, right? Like you can support it with money. You could hire all these trainers, personal chefs, but like you got to put in the work. But I think the crazy thing though, too, like to kind of counter this a little bit, if I'm saying who's the healthiest individual and I'm looking at like overall total health, I don't think it's like the guy that's the most peeled or like the biggest dude or like it's probably the guy that's like, I don't know, 15-16% body fat that has a healthy overall lifestyle that works out but enjoys their friends and hangs out. So I think you can tell a lot about like discipline, but I also think like you see a jack dude that's like maybe they're also like a little vain, maybe they're a little like insecure, maybe they're performing. I think
What are you
there's some
saying?
I'm just saying there's some negatives too, man. Like
Personal
I
attacks there.
Yeah.
listen, I'm putting
I'm not
myself in all these
insecure.
categories. But you know what I'm saying? Like I think we grew up playing sports where like it was very fundamentally important for us to like work out for a purpose. Now it's like we've done it so long, it's a passion, it's a hobby. But like there's no freaking reason for us to go throw hundreds of pounds on our back and squat it right now. Like you're not gonna die if you don't do it. It's like we like doing it. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm
No,
saying
I
is
know
like
what you're saying.
if you're talking overall fitness, I'm thinking like I want to be able to pick up my grandkids when I'm 80 years old. So I want to be strong enough in my legs to pick up my grandkids. So what kind of health are we talking about? And I think there's also like everything, you can take it to extremes, and probably everybody here is taking that to an extreme. And it's okay to have hobbies and do that too. Uh, but I don't think that also, I don't know. I think you could be there's a lot of good qualities that come with it. There's also, it can tell you like some negatives too about somebody as well.
So on that, I think that's a phenomenal point. You're already kind of changing my perspective a little bit because I think there's also massive detriment to like people that train, they put everything into it. And this is like behavioral, you know, you can't read everything about a person based on how they look. Everybody kind of gets that. But, the guy that is peeled and shredded and sitting around 5% body fat, it's not sustainable for your whole life. Like his life expectancy might literally be lower. He might not even make it to 80 to lift up his grandkids because he's been breaking his body down and wearing himself down. Whereas the guy that's been 15, 16%, he's got balance in his life. That might be the longevity type of health that is better for, if that's your goal, that might be the better guy. So I really like that perspective because I think to an extent, there's also, you can overdo it. And like, yeah, this guy's peeled now. He looks great. But he's going to be dead at 50. Like
I
Ronnie
think
Coleman.
like, yeah, well, PEDs are a pretty clear, bright line there, especially like abusing them. Like you're going too far down that path.
Right.
Um, but I think, yeah, I think it's a great point. I also think like throw a wrench into that in today's dopamine ridden world where like the way I look at it, At least this is how I rationalize it for myself. Like I'd rather get that through like training and doing that stuff and, maybe being a little too into that rather than, going out and drinking or sitting around playing video games or doing something that, it isn't, maybe as crazy as squatting super heavy weight and, maybe living to 80 plus years old. I don't know, probably can argue against all these things, but like, where are we going to get our fixes from?
Yeah.
I think like physical fitness, that being if that's your crutch or your vice is, physical fitness, that's one of the better ones I have.
Yeah, I agree with that too, man. And I'm playing devil's advocate here. Like, obviously, I'm a hypocrite of a lot of the stuff that I'm saying. Because there's days when my body doesn't feel good. I know I shouldn't work out, and I work out because I'm like, it'll make me feel better mentally. I just want to do something, and I'm getting better at
100%.
pulling back on those days and stuff. But I also think about, and I don't know what I'm gonna think about once I hit this, but once I'm 35 to 40 years old, I feel like I'm probably gonna change from trying to just put on as much muscle as possible to let me just stay strong and not hurt myself.
That's
And I don't.
dangerously close for me.
No, it's not.
4 years. It's not that long.
Hey, I gave you the 42 though. I gave you the 42.
3.5, really. Actually, 3 months for being real.
All right. Well, I'm just saying there's going to be a time in your life because, Pat, back to your point with physical stuff, physical pursuits are awesome and worthwhile. And I think you should 100% take care of your body. Also, don't put your identity in it, and everybody's going to get old and softer at some point. Your body just can't stay the way you want to stay when you're 80 years old. So it's I think it's like anything, man. You got to keep it in check, and not put not form your identity around it. Cause I think there's a lot of people, especially in the fitness industry, they gain millions of followers by their brand is them being shredded. And then they feel like crap, their hormones are messed up and they feel like they're trapped in this, I can never get out of this certain, I can never bulk because I'm going to look like crap. And then it doesn't help with my business. And people only like me because I have a visible six pack. I think there's a fine line of health. But it's also respectful when you see somebody in shape, you're I know that's hard to get. I respect they put in a lot of work for that. And so I think you got to keep that stuff in check, like most things in life, anything, too much of anything, even if it's a good thing, is probably not a good thing.
Definitely.
100% agree.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
anything can go too far. How about last point on this topic, but I also saw, and it's actually a couple years ago now, but it's same topic, different topic, but there's obesity is more common than starvation now in the world.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Is that a good problem to have?
I don't know. I don't think it's a good thing.
Let's ask.
I don't think it's
let's
a
ask
bad thing.
Saint Deacon over here.
Listen, I think everything that I'm saying is talking to you guys. I think you got to know your own individual situation because I think that you two would probably benefit from other aspects where other people would benefit from doing, if 70% of America is obese, they'd probably benefit from being more strict on their diet, working out more. I think you got to know your own situation. And I think that changes with seasons too and age and stuff like that. But if we're just talking about straight, we used to not be able to have enough calories to support the world population. We've hit that goal. So now it's there's abundance everywhere. You got to have discipline, and it's tough because everything is engineered to make it really hard for you to do that. So be educated on it and make the right choices for yourself. And I don't know. I think that's that.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic in so many regards because it went from the human condition was being able to exist in a landscape of scarcity to being able to exist in a landscape of overabundance. And if anything, it's in some ways, I'm not going to say in all ways, in some ways it's harder now because humans are genetically, historically, our brains are wired. Our ancestors grew up in scarcity. Like that's how humans are really kind of meant to exist, coming from the hunter gatherer all the way through like 100 years ago. That's how we're coded. And now we have all this abundance, and how are we going to deal with that? And I think that's where it's kind of a heavy topic for Pondering Pat, but where a lot of depression, anxiety, suicide comes from, is we live in this world of abundance. And as humans, we don't know how to cope with it.
Yeah, you already have everything. So what's the purpose?
Yep.
Yeah, I think too, like you talk about this, not to get too much longer on this, but like, I don't know, man. Some people are in tough situations where it's like they're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to support a bunch of kids. They're trying to, so some other aspects of your life might be out of whack when you're trying to, do stuff for other people. I don't think that's like, I think there's always probably something you can do better. And I would argue that like taking care of yourself is important, and will make you better in other aspects. But I do think like there's plenty of people that like work out, try really hard, and just for whatever reason don't get the results they want, and they should probably spend more time on that aspect. But I don't think it's like a lack of trying or discipline. It's their focus is in a different area as well. Um, and I think it's super important that people figure that out. And it's one of the things I'm really grateful for with wrestling is I think that I never would have learned much about nutrition. I never would have learned as much about like strength training as an individual sport like wrestling, a weight class sport like wrestling. And I think it teaches people to understand that. And sometimes there's bad habits with it too. And I feel like there's even habits that I have to unwind a little bit when I look back at my career where I'm like, I wish I enjoyed it more. I was just everything was like, get to the next thing, get to the next thing. I wish I sat and smelled the roses a little bit. Then I'm like, would I have pushed myself as hard or done as well if I sat down and enjoyed stuff? So I don't know, man. I think there's like a lot of different ways that people take on life. It works for some people, it doesn't for others.
Pat, I
Absolutely.
think, I agree with you, Ryan. And one of the reasons I enjoyed our last podcast with you so much, Pat, is how you look at work and how it's kind of shifted. But I think like if there's one message, which gets back to control what you can control, just like do the work. The work itself is like the work is the win. The work is the gift.
The obstacle is the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree with that, man. I really do.
I like
Who's
it.
next? What's next? Next topic.
Max, do you have any?
No. Came completely unprepared.
Unprepared for this. Unprepared for this meeting.
I just kind of brought one. I had the.
Oh, you did. You
did.
Hey, no, I just want to make sure if you had. I did have an interesting study that I read recently that was kind of funny, and I want to know what you guys think about this. But it was talking about couples working out is maybe not as beneficial as like people think. It's like they were talking about. They were arguing that it hinders progress. And I think a lot of that has to do with like maybe lowering your weights because you're with somebody it's easier to like lighten the weights so you're not changing weights as much. Harder to schedule workouts because you're working on 2 schedules instead of 1.
Definitely.
And so they had a bunch of different, I guess, points, but it was just interesting to me because you'd think, I don't know. I think an accountability partner is super important, but then I think it kind of makes sense too. If you're working out with your significant other, you might have different goals. Like I think about like if I work out with Chloe, like I'm definitely trying to lift harder, like heavier than what she's trying to do. And so like, I don't know. Do you guys think that working out with a couple like actually makes your progress worse, or should you be working out with your significant other?
So, couple different facets there. One, I mean, from like the actual training perspective, I think there's a lot of like logistical things. Like, yeah, you guys both probably can't share the same rack and do the same things because Max is putting 4 plates on to squat and bench, and significant other probably isn't. But there's probably that side of it too. Um, but I'm looking at it from like a relationship perspective too. Like if that, if training and uh, progress is something you really care about, you take very seriously, like it frustrates me when I like can't get a good workout or I can't focus on what's important to me. Like I'm worried about like, what are they doing? Their form is dog shit. Now I'm just judging it, now I'm focusing on that instead of focusing on my performance in the training room or whatnot. Um, I think separation of like church and state there is a good thing too, because it's like having a good relationship is also, I think it's healthy to like have trust and faith that, yeah, my partner goes, they work out, they train their ass off. And then we come home together. And when we're home, we're home. We're not like bringing that same, um, cause there's a lot of competitive and comparison type of culture within what we do and how we do it. And that's just who we are. So I always found that it's difficult to like kind of bring that into the same household because then the comparisons are brought in as well. And that I don't think that's healthy in a relationship long term because then you're starting to, like I said, compare and judge and critique rather than like celebrate independent progress. Like just like this person's independently successful. They have their own routines. They crush it. I trust that. I have faith in that. That, in my opinion, is a healthy relationship. Nothing against working out as couples because some people do it incredibly well and they've got really strong relationships because of it. Um, but
I think that's a really good point. I think you just synthesized uh, what I didn't really know. We do like Alexis and I met in the gym, of course.
That's
But
a
and we worked out together at first, and then we just kind of stopped doing it. And I think exactly for the reasons you just put forth, Pat. But it's also like after you've been, we're married for several years now. You can start getting frustrated with each other. like
yeah, for sure.
like it just happens. Now, what I will say is Alexis and I, we never lift together or do the same programs. Largely, we have very different goals. I'm trying to
Yeah.
get as big and meaty as possible, and Alexis isn't always. But there's also like we just enjoy doing our own things, but we will show up and like support each other. I'll put her through her workout. She'll spot me and encourage me. So like we won't do the same workout together, but we'll show up for each other in the gym.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because like the more I think about this, um, something that you guys both just said is like where I would disagree with this is if you had the exact same goals as your significant other,
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of benefits to having a training partner. Like obviously, I think having an accountability partner and somebody that's there, grinding through it with you, um, and pushing you and is always, I don't know, pushing the envelope with you. I think there's a lot of benefits to that. Um, but I also think there needs to be a sense of internal motivation too, where it's not just like you're relying on this other person to go. But I do think it's easier to cancel a workout if it's just you. You're like, hey, I don't feel like it. I'm not going today. But your buddy's like, hey, I'll meet you at 4. You're like, okay, I'm going to be there at 4. So yeah, I think this study actually, the more I think about it, when I first read it, I was like, doesn't really make sense. Kind of makes sense. I think most people have different goals than their significant other, which makes it tough to kind of maximize each person's
Yeah.
goals. Yeah.
Here's the other thing too. Like, I kind of know who I am. I know I'm overly critical, not only of other people, but myself more than anything. But it's almost like I would rather have trust and faith in like that person's training plan on their own. Cause like I've never seen what they do before. And I like the way they look. I like the way they carry themselves. I like the way that they take care of their body. I don't know the ins and outs of their programming. I'd almost like to keep it that way instead of like the fear of like, okay, then I see behind the scenes and well, their workouts are pathetic, and it's like now I've seen that. I can't unsee it. It's like it's almost the unknowing is safer than knowing and disapproving of it. Like I don't want to be overly critical because I've seen this person squat and now I just can't unlook at how terrible or like, and I don't even want to go down that road because I know who I am, So I think there's also a benefit to just you do your own thing. I like, you know, the residual benefits of that, and I have faith in that. And don't open Pandora's box.
Ignorance is bliss for you?
100%. And I'm speaking from experience because I've messed
Oh,
this up before.
That's awesome.
that's funny. I do think though,
Okay.
dude, one of the best, like, I don't know, tips, piece of advice for, like, if you're a young lifter and you can find somebody that's like strong in your gym that'll actually work out with you, it's one of the best ways to get strong because you have no other choice than to just like, you're like, wow, this guy, I see the proof. He's he's big and strong, and I'm just gonna go lift and do what he does. You're probably gonna put on muscle, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And I think taking that outside of fitness, sports, athletics, find mentors. Like find somebody that's been somewhere you want to be and just do what they're doing. And I guarantee you'll learn a lot along the way. Um, I think, and once people get to a certain point, they always, everybody I've ever been around that, I ask for advice, they like giving advice. Like people like helping people, um, in a respectful way, right? Like you got to be smart about how you're asking people that. But I think it's a very easy way to, like, if you don't know something, go find somebody that knows it and just start spending as much time with them as possible.
Yeah, people love sharing advice. I mean, it's one of the best ways for somebody to reaffirm themselves. Somebody asks you, "Hey, how do you do this?" It's almost like feeding into their own security. It's making them feel good. They would love to do that. Ryan, you just brought up a really good point. Kind of shifting that and playing into it a little bit too. I do think that some people don't know what they don't know. Like
Mhm.
the other thing too is like you could have a young lifter that's going to the gym. He's like, "Yeah, I'm working hard. I think I'm doing all the right things." They might not even know that the human body has another gear. Like they might need exposure by a lifting partner or somebody like maybe it's a coach or whoever that like, no, you actually can push way harder than that. So like people's relative exertion, they think like, "Oh yeah, I would rate that workout a 10 out of 10." You have no idea, homie. Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
was a 4.5. There is more levels to this, and that nobody would,
100%.
you wouldn't even find that unless you were exposed to that level 8 or level 9, on somebody else's scale, because it's all relative. Like when we lifted with Max, we did a massive chest day that was, it's probably going to go down in the records in some. Maybe it's on a stone tablet somewhere, for the historical records. But
Uh,
like,
no,
we hit. Go ahead.
I agree. No, I was gonna totally agree with this point. For one, it happened to me. I thought I lifted hard. This was my freshman year of college. I went and trained with this guy. I'm trained in college strength and conditioning rooms at this point. I'd wrestled all through high school. I'm a freshman at Lehigh, and I went to train with a guy named Alan Watkins, who's like a pretty famous trainer. He trains a lot of MMA guys and bodybuilders. And I went into Armrest Pro Gym down in Denver, and he like opened my mind. I thought I worked out hard. He put me on the leg extension, just a leg extension. And I was like in shock. I was like, wait, one, this hurts really bad. Two, I can do this. Three, I kind of like it. And I'm not sure why. But like it changed my whole perspective on training, which brings me to
Yeah.
another point of one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of strength training is it is such a controlled and low risk from like an injury or, things that can go wrong, especially you doing it with a professional or someone who knows what they're doing, where you can really learn that limit. Like being in the weight room is one of the best places to learn, expand your mind in that area, Pat. Like you said, like
Mhm.
you don't know what you don't know. I actually just had the one kid I helped coach from the local high school here come in and do a leg day, and he didn't know what he didn't know. And now he knows.
And now
But
he's in a
like we were able
wheelchair.
to do it. Yeah. He was hurting though. Like, but I think it was really good for him because he's like, oh, I can train this hard and I'll be all right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, like when we did chess, you kind of introduced me to partials, and I just reflecting on that workout, I was like, dude, I've probably left hundreds, maybe even thousands of reps or half reps on the table, right where there's like that juice at the the last 10% of contraction, the first 10% of extension. Like I've left all that on the table. I didn't even know, So now I'm like, I'm hitting partials and everything I can do. So,
Heck yeah.
Hey,
You're going to be 230.
I might be.
to that point though, um, how do you think about so Max? I don't know if you felt this way, Pat, ever before, but Max just talked about like the time he figured out like, oh, there's another level of training, right? And you work out with somebody else, you're like, oh, there's like this higher gear. How do you decide like how much to use that gear? Because if you're truly training like that,
Mhm.
right? Like you can't do that, especially in the middle of a wrestling season, middle of a football season, baseball season. Like you can't have 10 killer back-to-back days of stuff like that. And so I think the importance of like having somebody also like looking at overall training load and having a smart training plan, because when it's time to go, it's time to go. Um, but you can't truly have that kind of output every single day. And that's why I don't know, it fascinates me training cycles and whatnot, because I think when I was younger, same thing happened to me too with like zone two running just for conditioning in college. I used to hate running because I'm like, I'd get on a treadmill and I just sprint as fast as I could for a couple
Mhm.
miles and then get off. And then I'm super sore the next day. My legs are shot at practice. Like I don't feel good and it just sucks. You got to really mentally prepare and gear up for that. And then I realized like, oh, I don't need to do that every single time I run. I can do these lighter like zone 2 cardio runs where it's like I feel good, my legs feel good, and I increase my zone 2 cardio, my aerobic, like my aerobic base, right? So I don't know, there's you got to hit those high intensities, but like you got to think about training these. And how do you guys think about once you found that gear, did you struggle with like knowing when to tap into that gear and when not to?
Dude, 100%, man, 100%. This is like a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Like looking back at my own competitive career too. And, I've had a laundry list of injuries just over the years. I am like a perpetual overtrainer. And Ryan, you've been more influential in this than you could even imagine, like with just kind of understanding, like you need to keep yourself in check. Cause I'm like a redliner. Like my whole college career, I didn't even realize it. Like I probably had adrenal fatigue every single season, and it always happened at NCAA's because I was just pushing, pushing, pushing way too much intensity, completely overdoing it. And then that's when you're at risk for injury, fatigue, massive, hormonal issues, throws your whole body off. And I was like, yeah, freaking working harder than everybody else, but I was literally overdoing it. And I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I've been struggling with some injuries and stuff totally related to me just being an idiot because I wasn't slowing down. And I learned that lesson like over and over and over again. And it's me not taking responsibility for myself. I completely agree with you. Like you have to, and again, that's where like the buddy system's huge. Like you got to be able to have somebody that's going to hold you accountable positively and then also not negatively, but sometimes less is more,
Label.
bud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And like looking back,
I
every single coach I ever had always told me, Bruck, do less. And I was like, what are you crazy? Like, why wasn't I listening to these people? So I totally agree with that. I think it's our sport too. It's probably rampant. You got kids that just
oh,
overtrain, and it's sad, and that's part of my mission as transitioning to a coach is trying to share that experience too. Cause I made mistakes and I'm not happy with them, but I'm hoping that I can share that experience with kids that I can live vicariously through. Now support their journey and hopefully they don't make the same mistakes.
yeah, it's a ton of wisdom right there. I think there's two sides of it, right? You got to be able to hit that gear, but then you also got to know what the cost of hitting that gear is,
Mm,
right? And you got to be able to recover from it. And all of that is what plays into truly being elite. And I think if your tendency, like I always say this to my dad, because my dad is I like that term, a redliner. He's like, yeah, but I want to, that's, excuse my language, but I don't can't take it there. That's for pussies. Like, no, when I start trying to do, and I'll do this with myself, right? And I talk about it, it's like, no, if you don't take the day off, you're a pussy.
Literally.
Like you
Literally.
gotta like play this game because that's like the harder choice, right? If you're like want to just go and that's your tendency, then you probably got. But then there's probably other people where taking the day off's a little too easy. So you got to have a little bit more of that redliner in you. So I think it's finding that balance. And at the end of the day, that means knowing what the cost of recovery is going to be, and then doing that, having that built into your training cycle, your programming. Ryan and I also talk about this with power, like wrestling. You can find a way to succeed feeling like crap, right? If you're better than a guy, you're just going to beat him, whether you're overtrained or, not. With powerlifting, when you're trying to like move as much weight as humanly possible, like if I overtrain or I go too hard on my accessories, when my coach says do an RPE 8, I do RPE 10s. Like the next time I go to squat that big weight, it's not moving.
Mm.
When I listen to coach and I do the RPE 8s, it's moving. It's like such a direct feedback. It's really helped me learn how to pay attention to these things, believe it. Cause I'm like you, Pat, I'm like, why would I take it easy? Like that's dumb.
Yep.
But there's a reason. Like you got to be able to recover. We're still human. We're not machines. We're humans. You gotta recover.
I
One
think
of
that's
the
such. Go ahead, Pat.
Go ahead, Deke.
No, you got it.
I just like I said, I mean, this is near and dear to me. Like one of the harshest realities I ever figured out looking back on my competitive and performance career. Like I got the opportunity to train with some incredible and highly successful people, Olympians, gold medalists, national champions, all the works. And some of the harshest realities that I had to learn was that I train harder than these people. And it's like, I'm out training Olympians here. But the reality is that I'm overdoing it and they're prioritizing, they're picking and choosing so much better than I am. Because I'm just making it easy on myself. Because the hard way is the easy way for me. It's just easy for me to say, yeah, you just bust your ass every time. And once I figured out that there was a new gear, it was like, that's addicting. I'm going there every time. But then it's not sustainable. So like you have to have, and there's a lot of humility there. You got to put the ego aside. You got to do less. So it's incredibly difficult, especially for people that are super, super driven. And once you get to that 1%, now, it literally is like, Max, like you're saying, like guy takes one off day when his body actually needs it. That could be the 1 or 2% edge that you need to actually put up 1,000 pounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree and very much identify with what you're saying. I will also caveat though that I think that's not many people that are like
Yeah.
you. It's like that's their problem is going too hard. Like maybe in the world of Division I wrestling it is because that's a very special group of people in that way. But in life, I think we can and maybe say that you just need to know where that next level is. And when you find it, also know what the cost is. But also, you got to push yourself if you're not. There's not
Yeah,
many
find that
people are
next level,
doing
dance with
what
it.
Pat's
You
doing.
know,
Yep.
it's you can't bulldoze it. You know, you've got to respond to it. You got to interact with it. It's a conversation. It's not a dominant thing. You really have to flirt with it a little bit and give and take with that highest gear. Um, and yeah, I mean, that brought me a lot of wisdom, even in the last like 6 months of my life, like coaching, realizing, Ryan has an incredible perspective on how he's trained. I've learned a ton from him, in multiple areas of life, but that's a huge thing for me that I've really like realized that's, become really important. And I want to share that with other people.
I think too, man, being self-aware. Like all of this is being self-aware because some people are on a different journey, right? Like Pat, you'll be
Yeah.
better off taking more off days. There's some people that need to learn to work hard. And
Mhm.
maybe this is a hot take, but I think probably more people are better off overtraining when you're young, figuring it out, working hard, and then pulling themselves back. Because like as a coach, I'd rather be pulling a guy back than being like, come on, you got to show up, man. You need to be
Oh
training
yeah.
harder right now.
Nothing
Um,
worse than that.
but I do
Right.
remember one of my like good mentor of mine, somebody I owe like a lot of my college wrestling career to, like Coach Andrew Howe. He sat me down one day and was like, "Hey man, I think it was my junior year." And he's like, "Listen, you're not 18 years old anymore. You need to actually take those off days off." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." I kind of listened to it. And then I kind of thought about it and continued to do it. And it was like, whatever he said, I was like, all right, I'm doing it. And so I started to do that. And I was like, wow, he's right. I feel so much better the next day. I get so much more out of it. My body recovers and I stay healthy. And so it's just like amazing to me to have somebody sit me down. And I think there was a lot of wisdom in how he did it, because the first 2 years, it was like training a bunch, doing a bunch of extra stuff, putting in these extra workouts. And then once it got to a point, he was like, listen, be smart. And so I think there is like, you got to develop it too. Um, but I don't know, man. I think when you're younger, you kind of find that line. But I also learned along the way, just because my body can handle it doesn't mean it was optimal for me. Um, and it's a lot
True.
more costly in sports, right? Like if you're performing and you do bad, like you perform poorly on the field, it's embarrassing. It's not good. Like, could cost you a lot of money if you're a professional athlete.
Mm.
Um, if you overtrain in everyday life, it's not that big of a deal. You fail on a bench set. So I think sports make you learn that lesson a little bit more, just because the stakes are a little bit higher. So yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I think it's like
No,
having
I
somebody
actually
around.
think it's a lot of wisdom in what you said.
Hey, thanks, Max. I appreciate that.
You're
But
welcome.
I don't know. It's just you gotta find your line and know yourself, and then being surrounded by people too is important. And I think also you can't compare yourself, because everybody's so individual. Like, I can't compare myself to you, Max, to you, Pat. Like, we could be on the same exact training program. It's too much for me. It's not enough for you, or it's too much for you. It's not enough for me. And so,
Mhm.
kind of circling back to before, like, find your mentors, figure it out, but you also got to take in data and understand your body too, because everybody's different. Everybody's situation's different. Everybody's sleep's different. Their stress levels are different. Recovery ability genetically is different. So, I mean, you gotta take that in and be self-aware and constantly be looking for improvement there too. You can't just cookie cutter this. Like, anything cookie cutter is not going to be optimal for you.
That's it. Totally agree with everything you just said.
Totally agree. Max, I was telling Ryan the other day, um, it's funny because that trope when, when dad or mom tells you to do something, it's like, I'm not doing it because dad told me to do it. But then when Ryan Deacon and Max Wessel tell me to do something, I'm like, oh my God, I got to do this. Like, it's like, it's the same exact thing. They're both telling me the same thing, but like, you've got these certain mentors and, it, you know, Deacon for you, it's Andrew Howe, obviously an incredible mentor. Guy's a legend in the sport. For me, it's like, you two are in that list, but it's like, I think it's hilarious how, uh, you know the right thing and you know it and you fight it and you fight it and you fight it. But then once you hear it from like the, the audience and the perspective that means so much to you, you're like, damn, I'm wrong.
Yep. But
I had
here's
to,
the here's the funny thing. Probably all three of us are going to go back and be overtraining and training too
oh
hard.
yeah.
And then we're going to have to remind ourselves and pull it back. And that's just the give and take.
You know what though? I don't understand, and I'm fighting against this, and I don't know how to figure it out. It's like most people know what to do, they just can't do it. Like, I really think it comes down to like calming your mind and just trusting it. And Pat and I talk about this a lot, but if you're struggling with the decision and you can like pull yourself out of your body and be like, listen, let's say it's some blank avatar over here I'm talking to. Here's the full context of the situation that I already understand in my head. What would I tell them to do? And go do that. Because I would tell somebody else to do something different, and then I'll go do the exact opposite, because I'm like, nah, it doesn't work for me. Doesn't apply to me.
Exactly.
And so, like, if you can coach yourself unbiased and take your situation objectively and take like the human emotion out of it, it's so like the outcomes are so much better. It's just so hard to do.
Yeah, we think we're
Agreed.
special. We think we're special. We individualize it so much. Oh, I'm different. Are you? I don't know.
Not different. Just another guy. No, I agree, Ryan. And I think I would challenge, it's not calming your mind. It's like being in your wise mind. You're almost
Mm.
more present. You're fully present. You're using your wise mind. You're not thinking, but you're just using the wise part of your brain, not the meat, meathead,
Yeah. No, I agree.
whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
I
The
think it's
meat
like
head.
No, it's nomenclature, but
no, I agree with that. Like the anxiousness of like, I don't know, taking a day off where you're like, oh, I'm gonna be behind, or I'm not gonna progress as well, or I think wrestlers are like, I'm gonna blow weight because I take this day off. And so like being able to calm that part of your mind and like think logically, like
yeah,
it's
use
not
your
that
wise
big of a
mind.
deal. It's better for you. Yeah. I like it. Wise
Yeah,
mind.
Very
wise
Um,
Zen
mind.
Buddhist of you guys.
Thank you.
Zen Buddhism. I got one last question. And then maybe it's a good point. But what do you guys think about this? I think there's like a lot of anxiety when you're competing in a one-on-one sport, just because like any sport for sure, but one-on-one, it's all you out there. Um, and I think part of wrestling, I think cutting weight takes a lot of the anxiety away. Uh, at least I felt that way because I didn't really think about my matches too much or like get super, I wasn't overthinking it. I was thinking about like the fact that I didn't get to eat or drink. And so like when it boils down to like a basic human need of like, I just want some water, then I'm not thinking about like, oh crap, this guy's done this and this. What if I lose this match? Until like right before the match. And so I wasn't sitting with those thoughts for a long time. So I feel like cutting weight actually helped me perform better.
You guys ever seen the movie Major Pain?
Is that the
Uh,
boxing movie with the mall cop dude?
No, it's a comedy movie from the early 2000s. It's terrible. But this guy gets shot in the leg and he's like, my leg, my leg, my leg. And Major Pain walks over to him, breaks his finger. And the guy goes, my finger, my finger. He's like, yeah, see, now your leg don't hurt. You know what I mean? So to your point, Ryan, I think where you're focusing, if you're focusing on wrestling and performance and competition, this is everything. This is all of my focus right here, then it is everything. And then it is going to take up all of your mental and emotional energy because that's the only thing you're focusing on. Whereas if you're challenging yourself academically and it's like, I also have an exam to study for, my emotional energy and my anxiety is split between two different areas. There's a little bit less anxiety on the competition, performance, whatever you're focusing on. I remember when I was competing in NCAAs and some of the best games of pool, like billiards, I ever played were right around that time. Cause I would start focusing on like, I just want to be a good pool player. I was terrible, but for me, that was like my outlet to put more energy and effort in. And it took my mind off of wrestling, which was eating up
Mm.
my emotional energy. So I think having something, whether that's faith or a hobby, or ping pong, pool, break a finger, whatever it is, I think that maybe it's cutting weight, Ryan, like your point. I think that's a huge thing. You almost need something like that to share the mental and emotional energy that goes into the competitive aspect.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Max, I kind of want to hear your perspective as well because you went from cutting weight to not cutting weight. So I don't know if you had like that anxiety kind of change because you weren't worried about making weight. It was like, how do I feel my best? Where Pat and I are like, how do I get this five
yes.
pounds off so I can make like wrestle?
Mm.
Yeah. So I think what Pat said is exactly right. Like it's just having something to focus on. And for me, it was instead of when I went from cutting weight to being a heavyweight, I was doing it like as best as I could. So I went from, you know, how do I lose 5 pounds to like weighing out 7 meals a day and eating 6,000 calories. Like it was a different kind of focus on that side of things.
Hmm.
But what I think it really is you focus on doing each and every little thing to the best of your ability. rather than focusing on the outcome and, how intense, the upcoming wrestling match is. That's where if you spend your energy and focus on controlling back to that, controlling the little things you can control, whether
Mhm.
it's making weight, being as big and strong as you can be, sleeping well, uh, covering your bases in the classroom, whatever it is. If you're focusing on the little things you can control, the big things just kind of happen. And, you can lump cutting weight into that. You can lump probably everything into that. But that's kind of how I pivoted to look at it when I wasn't cutting weight.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember, like Chloe would always ask me right before a competition. She'd be like, "You excited?" And I'm like, I didn't really thought about it. I'm just like, I'm trying to get to the weigh-in, man. Like I got to make weight, And so I was like, I don't really feel like a nervousness and excitement. And then once I weigh in, it's like, okay, awesome. Now I can go wrestle. Now I can be excited for this match. So I felt like that was kind of weird. And then I also felt like there was a certain level of like, even an off day was a good mental break from wrestling. Physical was awesome too. Like the mental break of like not putting everything on it. Like you need some time to get away from it too, a little bit. Um, and even, I'd have conversations with, my old man would call me and he'd start asking about wrestling and be like, let's talk about something else. I live wrestling 24/7. And I think that helped me like be better at wrestling, which is weird. But not feeling like it was the only thing that I was thinking about or doing helped me feel like I could perform more freely in wrestling. And I think cutting weight added an element of that. Like you're not focusing, and obviously there's a certain limit where you're cutting too much weight, where you're just focusing on the cutting weight. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's something I've been thinking about. Like, how does cutting weight affect your anxiety? I guess leading up to a match.
So something there that I want to share, like, I know you guys can both speak to this intimately probably, but for people that don't realize, we're talking about cutting weight, which is one thing, one type of adversity, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, we tell a lot of our athletes some of the best semesters of performance, best seasons of wrestlings are the ones that are accompanied by the hardest class schedule. Or, maybe it's an extracurricular obligation that like you were so,
Mm,
you had so much on your plate that you didn't have the luxury of procrastination or having one thing eat up all your mental focus. You end up doing better in all of those things because you have so much on your plate. So it's not
yeah.
mutually exclusive. Like, oh, I have less to worry about, so I'm better in this area. Sometimes it's counterintuitive. It's like, no, take more on, put more on your plate, and then your body will adjust to that new level of gameplay. Now you got to bring that same energy to 4 or 5 different areas. So now I can't let any one bog me down. I'm just going to be the best I can when I'm in the wrestling room. I'm the best wrestler I can be. When I'm in the classroom, I'm the best student I can be. When I'm at an extracurricular event, I'm the best, class president or board member I can be. Whatever that is, it's almost like you end up, maximizing all areas of your life when you have the most in your life.
I agree. I think it's, not letting it consume your identity. I
Mhm.
used to say like, I'm not a wrestler. I'm a guy who wrestles, but it can be, you can say that for anything. I'm not a powerlifter. I'm a guy who powerlifts. I'm not a businessman. I'm a guy who does business. I'm not
Mhm.
a coach. I'm a guy who coaches. So it's just not letting what you're doing become your identity. And then it kind of takes a little bit of that edge off of it. And I think back to wrestling, Ryan, to your point, it is because it is so intense. It's really easy to have it become your identity. So it's good to be aware of that and kind of to your point, whether it's pool or anything else, bring something else in that so it doesn't have you wrap you up.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's also like huge faith thing too, right? Like putting your identity in something bigger than yourself versus like
Yeah.
your sport or your performance in business or your performance at your job or whatever. Um, Yeah, I do think there's a fine line too, though. That's interesting because Pat, I totally agree with you. Like sometimes you got to add when you're busy, you're like firing on all cylinders. You're efficient and you figure out how to do stuff the right way.
Mhm.
Um, But then you can also redline that too. I find myself sometimes like adding too much, and then I'm spinning so many plates. I'm like, I got to cut some stuff out.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think pushing the envelope with that is super productive and important, but you got to also keep that in check too, like anything else. And it's weird trying to find that line, because I think where growth happens is when you're uncomfortable and when you're probably adding a little too much more than you can handle. But you also can't do that for super long periods of time all the time without something completely dropping. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
Yep. It's like, I think we've come back to like the same three things, but it's control what you can control. Got to have self-awareness. It's really those two things.
Mhm.
Boom.
And on it,
I love it. No, that's great.
Drop the
One
mic.
last, yeah, but before I drop the mic, just real quick, X and I wear the same size swimsuit. Pat, you're the man. Thanks for coming on. Drop the mic.
thank you.
Always a pleasure.